In this video, we're going to talk about decals. When you're creating your high quality rendered images of whatever product you've designed, a lot of times you're going to need to add additional information, whether it's numbers or letters signifying a part number and something that's maybe not cast in or molded into the part, or maybe it's just promotional information, maybe a sticker for the company name or warning decals or whatever the case might be. There are many instances where we need to add more product information, more product details to our images. And that's not something that you want to do by modeling them. You don't ever want to do split lines on the surface in order to get a certain sticker or number reference on there. What we want to do is we want to use a decal. Now, for my render tools menu, I'm going to use edit decal. It automatically brings me into a SOLIDWORKS decal library. Now, there are some logos automatically loaded in here. Now, you'll notice there's barcode, there's some standard SOLIDWORKS logos, recycling, registered trademarks, some good ones that are in here that you may or may not need to use. What I need to do is search for one that I already have on my hard drive. So I'm going to browse for the path, and it's located within the documents that are provided with this course. So I'm going to select this PNG image, and you'll notice that once I select this image, it's located in the decal preview. For now, what we want to do is we want to go to the mapping section. This is where we're going to be selecting geometry, selecting somewhere to place it. For the purposes of what we want to do, I'm just going to go ahead and place it on the back of my speaker right here. Now, this gives me a very good reference here because I can explore a few different types of mapping. Now, this is very similar to the mapping that we did when we're using a textured material. But in this case, we want to be very careful that we apply this the same way we would an actual decal. The first thing I need to do is shrink this thing down. It's a little bit too large. So I'm going to make it 60 millimeters wide, and that will auto scale it to be a certain height. Then I can move it over, and you'll notice that it's not dragging across multiple faces. If I go back up to my selected geometry, I can select the other face, and now I can drag it across. You'll notice that it's doing some funny things here. The reason is because we're using a projection type mapping. If I use a label type mapping, you'll notice that we have a warning. The label map decal may not properly align because the selected faces, which are not coplanar, do not share a linear edge. Please consider using projection mapping for better results. Projection mapping will work, but the problem is projection mapping doesn't give us an ideal situation because we're dealing with a lot of curvature here. So we have some other options. We have spherical, which, as you can see, it's kind of obscuring things here. It's not really putting it in the right area. If we rotate this around to where we need it, it becomes okay. It's a usable solution. And the last option we have here is cylindrical. Again, these are coming from pretty random directions. We can select a reference. For instance, if we have a plane, if we zoom out, we can see that we have a few planes here. If we select our front plane, we can use our front plane as a reference. We can change this to be a 0 degree offset, and we can pull it in the direction we need to. We can pull it around, we can rotate it around. But you'll notice that this thing, again, is pretty large. The scale is pretty large. So we want to make that quite a bit smaller. And what you'll notice is it's distorting as it's wrapping around the sides because it is based on the curvature here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to mirror this thing horizontally and vertically to get it oriented properly. We're going to look at this thing from the front plane, and we're going to look at it from the back. So we still have an angle here. We want to make sure that we're not using some sort of angle distortion here. So we want to make sure that we're using standard angle areas. And then we want to drag this into view where we need it. Go ahead and do 180. 180 gets us close to where we want to be. And then we can manually manipulate this and put it where we need it. So that's a pretty good option there. And that was using the cylindrical reference. If you want to use a projection reference, it's highly recommended that you use a plane, such as the front plane. Now, as we look at this from the front, that's obviously not in the right area. We need to move it. Again, we have the same problems. We have the angle problems. We look at this from the back, you can see that it's actually offset. We can use the sliders to position it if we want to. Again, we can hold down the Alt keys and we can hold down Control keys to sort of focus in here, or we can manually enter values and get it close to where we want it. Puts it pretty close to the center. We'll go just a little bit more, 24. And now we've placed it pretty close to the center. We need to undo the mirror because now we have it facing the appropriate direction. Now that we have it placed there and we've explored all the different types of mapping options, we did projection, we did label, we also used spherical and cylindrical. And in the end, projection gave us a pretty good result once we used a reference plane. But it's important that you explore your options and you see how each of these will distort your specific decal. Now that we have it placed properly, let's take a look at illumination. Now, illumination also has a dynamic help. It also has an underlying appearance option. Now, this underlying appearance option will take any of the appearance settings from the material that it's applied to. So, for instance, we're dealing with a high gloss white plastic. If we want this sticker to be essentially high gloss and reflective, we can take on that material. Otherwise, we can use the standard values or we can manually manipulate these values. Go ahead and say OK. And now what we've done is we've applied this decal to the back of our part. Let's go ahead and do a quick preview and take a look at how this looks on our part in a preview render. So you can see here, we've applied that JBL decal to the back side of our speaker. And even though there's a line down the center of this because it's actually a mirrored component, once we do the final render or even the preview window, we don't have any seams or any edges in there. We just have the sticker or the decal that's applied to the back of our part. Using decals is a great way to add potentially complicated information, geometry, whether it's warning labels, whether it's just product information, and just applying those decals to your appearances. That way you have them in the renders. You don't have to do any complicated modeling to try to get that information in.